Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Mr. Wiz here. If you are new to my channel, we build video games. So I've got a couple different playlists on my channels with different systems that I've been using to build these lessons. Right now we're looking at Unity. So if you've already been going through this process, the first thing I had you guys do was build an FPS game using the micro game. So there you can see mine, the one that I was building in the videos. To build those, we would go to New Project and we would go to the Learning section, and that shows us the learning programs. So these learning programs are a great way to get started because they teach you basics. They have a tutorial that they walk you through and they teach you a lot of basic skills, and they allow you to get started in a game that's already been built. So hopefully you've already had a chance to play around with one of these. We did the FPS micro game, but there are others. There's the 2D platformers, great if you want to learn more about 2D games. If you're using one of the older versions, there are other learning ones in there, such as the Lego micro game and the karting micro game. So great ways to learn about Unity just by playing with it, right? But it is time for us to go ahead and build our own program. So this time I'm going to build the 3D built-in render pipeline. So a 3D core project is what I'm going to build. If you're not using the 22 version and you're using something else, just look for the basic 3D version. That's what we're going to be working with today. There are other 3D versions. So for instance, here you'll see I've got Universal 3D. I've got High Definition 3D. So those are also 3D core programs, the difference being the quality. We don't need anything super high quality for what we're going to be doing, so we're just going to use the built-in pipeline. All right, so let's go ahead and name this. So for this project, I'm just going to call it Foundations, because we're going to be learning the basic principles of Unity, the foundations of Unity that will help us get started. So you can just call your project Foundations, or you might want to call it Unity Foundations, something like that, so that you know that this is the project where we're just learning those basic skills. We will be coming back to this many, many times over the next several videos, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create that project, and that will take a couple minutes. It always takes a little bit of time to get a project created in Unity as it's setting up all the settings and all that jazz. So today, as this is getting built, I'll go ahead and tell you what we're doing today. Today, we're going to look at how to build a simple object. And then we're going to turn that object into a prefab. So some fun stuff going on today. You've seen prefabs if you did the micro games. A lot of the stuff that was in there were prefabs. There were enemy prefabs, there were wall prefabs, floor prefabs. So a prefab is basically something that's pre-built that you can quickly and easily throw into your game. So we're going to be creating our own prefabs today using some simple basic shapes. And we'll go into all that in just a few moments. All right, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this because it seems like the setup's taking a little while. Okay, so I'm in. My program has been created. Let's take a look at some things here. So once again, this was built with the 2022 version. So if you're using an older version or a newer version, there will be differences, but most of them will probably be subtle because every version of Unity that I've played with has looked very similar with some small changes. For instance, right here, where we have this little toolbox here, in the 2020 version, it wasn't here, it was up here underneath where it says File and Edit. So they moved that. But, small things like that. Still the same features, just in a different part of the layout. So let's talk about the layout. So if you did the micro game, you probably already learned a lot of this, but I still want to go over it with you to make sure you hit all the important stuff. So over here on the left-hand side, you've got the Hierarchy tab. The Hierarchy tab shows you everything that is currently in your scene. It also shows you what scene you are in. So right now mine says Sample Scene. And by the way, if you notice this little triangle there, if I click on that triangle, it will open or close the sample scene. When I first opened this, it was closed. So to see the stuff inside, I would click on that triangle to open it. Inside my sample scene right now, I have a main camera and a directional light. So I can click on those and I will see them in my game. Oh, why is it not letting me click? There we go. So there's the main camera. The main camera is the player's point of view. So this is what the player would see in my game currently, because there's nothing in my game currently. And then we have the directional light, which is right there. And just a reminder, if you ever need to find something in your game, you can click on it in the hierarchy, put your mouse over the scene view, and just press F to zoom in on it. So there's the camera, and there is the directional light. So whenever you have a new scene in Unity, they always start you with these two objects, the camera and the light, because those are kind of given, right? They're necessary for really any game to work. You need to have a light source, such as the sun or the moon, and you need to have a camera for the player to see anything at all. Without a camera, there is no program because the player won't see anything. So that's why your scenes always start with these two things. In the middle here, we have the scene view and the game view. So the game view shows you the player's view. Basically, right now, it's showing exactly what the camera is showing. It's showing us the camera. If we were to play a game, the game view is where we would see everything that we were playing, right? Because we're playing as the player. So we look through the game view to see the player's view. So scene view is where we do all of our work. This is where we're editing objects, moving things around, and all of that jazz. On the right-hand side, up here, you've got the inspector tab. This is where we can edit objects. So right now, with the main camera selected, I can see all the stats for the main camera here. And if I selected the directional light, I would see all the stats for the directional light. And these are, of course, things that we can edit once we learn how they work. In the bottom left over here, we have the project tab. So the project tab shows you everything that you have access to in your program. So all the prefabs, all the pictures, all the objects that you can put in your game and use in your game, all the code, it's all in the project tab. So it's almost like the toolbox that you would use to go grab the things that you need to build your game. In the favorite section, there are several things here. Several of these are new. In the 2020 version, which I'm a little bit more familiar with because I've used it longer, they only had all prefabs, all materials, and all models. I didn't have these three, so I'm going to have to figure out more about those as I continue making these videos. You have the assets, which shows you all the different folders that you have, and right now the only folder I have is the scene folder. I can double click on it, and there is the scene called Sample Scene, which is the scene that I'm in right now. That symbol you see there lets you know that it is a scene. When you have scenes in the project tab, they put that Unity symbol on top of it so you know what you are looking at. When you did the microgames, you should have had several scenes because you would have had the main scene, you would have had the title page scene. I think there was a win scene and a lose scene if you were doing the FPS version. So yes, scene objects allow you to switch back and forth between different scenes. So this is the only object in my game right now because we haven't put anything else in there, but we will be doing that soon. So that's the basic layout of the Unity program, but this is not the only way you can lay it out because all of this is editable, right? You can edit all of this. So for instance, if I didn't want my project tab to be so tall, I can shrink it. I could do the same thing with the hierarchy or the scene view or my inspector tab. I can adjust the sizes of everything here, but it's not just the sizes I can change their location. So for instance, one edit that I will sometimes make is I'll grab this game view, and instead of having it next to the scene view, I will drag it to a separate part of the screen. So maybe I'll put it down here with the project tab. So that allows me, having two views here, allows me to edit in one of them while I see what the player sees in the other one. That can be pretty helpful sometimes. Being able to see what the player is doing while you're making your edits can be very helpful, especially if you're doing things with like lighting or shadows, or something that affects the visual aspect of the game, right? All right, if you ever end up accidentally deleting something here, or if you end up moving stuff around and you decide you don't like it, you want to go back to the way it was, up in the top right corner, I almost said left, up in the top right corner where it says default right now, I can click on that, and this allows me to change the layout. There are several pre-made layouts. 2x3 is this one right here, where you have the two views, the scene view at the top, the game view at the bottom. Then you have the hierarchy, the project, and the inspector window here. I don't love this view. I do like scene and game being together. What I don't love about this view is the project window. Looking at a skinny project window is kind of tricky because you can't see the stuff inside of it very well. So if I was to have something like this, I would put the project window down here underneath the hierarchy. And now I feel like you have a little bit more room. It's a little bit easier to see what's going on, right? So I actually prefer a view more like this. But the 2x3 is not bad. There's the 4 split. This is an interesting one. With the 4 split, they do put the hierarchy window and the project window similar to the way I just had it. But you have 4 scenes, and they're all done with scene view. So technically, this is one tab 4 times. What's different about the 4 views is the perspective. So this one's showing you a top-down view. This one's showing you a view from the front. This one's showing you a view from the right. And then this one is the free perspective that you would move around in, similar to what I'm used to doing, right? So why would you ever want 4 views like this for the scene? I would say probably if you're doing a lot of modeling and design, maybe, right? You're putting things in your world and you want to make sure it lines up from every different direction. That is one of the tricky parts with putting things in your world in Unity, is it might look good from one direction, but then you see it from another direction and you realize, oh, it's not touching the floor, or it's not lined up with that wall as good as I thought it was going to be. So this can be useful if you have problems lining things up. But otherwise, I don't love this one because, it's taking up a lot of space, and also all the scene views are really tiny. So not my favorite one. The default one is the one we were on originally. There's the tall view, which gives you a really big scene view, which you can switch back and forth from scene to game, right? And then it has the other stuff similar to the one we were looking at earlier. There's also the wide view, once again with a really big window, but this time I put the hierarchy and the project tab below it. So these are all different ways you can customize the layout of your game. And as I mentioned, you can also drag and adjust the sizes. If you make your own layout and you like it a lot, you can save it. So up here where these layouts are, there's one that says Save Layout. In fact, I have one that I saved, which is the one called My Layout. If I click on that, this is my preferred layout when I'm building certain types of games. I have the big scene view, I have a big game view so I can see what it looks like while I'm building it, and then I have a big inspector tab, and my hierarchy and my project tabs are kind of small. So yeah, different ways of laying it out. I'm going to go back to default though, since that's what you guys have, and that's what a lot of people use, so I'll be using this probably most of the time. But if you ever want to change your layout, you're welcome to do so. Or like I said, if you ever accidentally break it or change it too much and you can't find stuff, just go back to default. Okay, so let's start building. Enough setups. Let's start building. In the sample scene, I'm going to open it up so I can see the stuff inside of it. I want to create a 3D object for my game. I'm going to start building something in my world. So to put a new object in your world that does not exist yet, so these aren't prefabs, we're creating our own objects, you have two ways of doing that. I can either right-click on this empty space in the hierarchy and then select the object I want to add. So there's empty objects, 3D objects, audio, effects, light, video, all sorts of things here. We're going to do the 3D object. So I can either do that here, or with sample scene selected, I can click on the plus sign and I can do it here. Is there a benefit to adding a 3D object this way versus the other way? Not particularly. The only time I would say it's really useful to do one way over the other is if you have a lot of objects in your scene and your scene's already pretty full. There's no empty space to click on, right? So if it's already a pretty full scene, it's best just to click on the plus sign and add it that way. So we're going to go ahead and add a 3D object. I'm going to start with the cube. So there is my 3D cube. I'm looking around it by holding down the Alt button, by the way, if you didn't know that trick or if you missed it in the microgame tutorial. If you hold down Alt, you can drag and look at things from different directions and different angles. So this is the cube I just put in my game. Let's look at the different buttons up here. So if the hand tool is selected, that just allows me to move around it without actually affecting the cube at all. So the one with the arrows is the move tool. So with this, I can drag one of these arrows and I can move it in a particular direction. I want you to notice that the arrows are colored. So there's a red, a blue, and a green. And this represents the X, the Y, and the Z, which you'll see on the little gizmo over here. So X is the red, blue is Z, and green is Y. And by grabbing one of these arrows, I can move it in that direction. Please note, over here in the inspector window where it says transform, it shows the position of my object. So it shows an X number, a Y number, and a Z number. That's its position. As I grab one of these arrows, you'll see those numbers change. So in the X direction, the red arrow changes the X, the blue arrow changes the Z, and the green arrow changes the Y. When you're dealing with objects in 3D space, I highly recommend you use the arrows. I have students who will sometimes grab these little inside, you see these squares in the middle? If you grab these, it tends to give you problems, because what happens is if I grab one of these, it's actually moving me in two directions at once. It's moving me in the Y and the Z direction. So if I'm trying to line an object up and I don't realize that, I might fix it in one direction and make it worse in the other. So whenever I move things in 3D space, I always grab the arrows. That way I'm only moving it in one direction at a time, and I don't have to worry about me fixing one thing while breaking something else, right? I might line it up perfectly in one direction and end up making it worse in another direction if I grab one of the inside squares. All right, so that is the move tool. And the next tool here is the rotation tool, which is the circle with the arrows. Once again, I want you to notice those three colors. We still have blue, red, and green. So this time we are rotating, and we are rotating around the different axes. So this is the x-axis, is the red one. And as I rotate it, it rotates around in that direction. The green axis rotates around the Y direction, and then the blue axis rotates around the Z direction. So we've got different directions that we can rotate things and cause a little chaos and craziness here. So now my cube is rotated in three directions in some weird ways, but there it is. And once again, in the transform section, you can see those numbers there for what my rotations currently are, along with the position. All right, let's talk about scale. This next one is the scale tool. I really love the scale tool. So once again, you've got red, green, and blue. Once again, I can do things in only a certain direction. So if I wanted to change this cube in only the Y direction, I can grab the green one, and now I'm changing the scale in that direction. So I can make it longer, I can make it shorter, I can decide what I want to do, and I'm only doing it in that one direction. The same thing it goes, of course, for the blue and the red, and I can adjust all of that. So maybe I'm making here a pretty skinny square shape, sort of. Not perfect square, more like a rectangle. But I adjusted the three scales, and this is what I've got. Now, with the move tool, I warned you guys to not grab the middle boxes because it can cause more problems than it's worth. With scale, I actually love the middle box. What the middle box does is it changes all three at the same time. So let's say you have an object and you actually like its proportions. So let's say that these proportions that I have right now are perfect for me. But the problem is the entire thing is the wrong size. Proportions are good, but the object is the wrong size. I can click on the gray square, and now I can make it smaller or bigger without changing the proportions. See how easy that is? I'm just dragging it up and down, and I'm changing the scale of all three, but the proportions are staying the same. So yeah, that gray box is actually pretty useful for scale. So if you have something that you already like the way it looks, you just want to change the size, maybe it's a model that you downloaded from the asset store, and it's either too big or too small, you don't want to change the proportions, but you do need to change the size, the gray box is going to be the easiest way to do that. Okay, so I've made lots of changes to this cube. What if you don't like the changes that you made? So over here in the transform, I already mentioned that you've got the numbers here. You can physically edit these as well. So maybe I want the scale to go back to 1, 1, 1. Or maybe I decided that I want to be 1, 1, 3. So I can manually type that in, right? Rotation, same way. I can type stuff here. Maybe I want it to only rotate 45 degrees in both the Z and the Y direction. There we go. Position, same ideas, right? I can tell it exactly where to go. Oh, by the way, position and scale and things of that nature, they are measured in meters. This is going to come in handy later on, right? So if I'm moving something, I'm moving it in meters. How many meters to the left? How many meters to the right? How many meters up? That's what these numbers represent. That's what they measure with, okay? So yes, you can type in numbers or you can use those tools. And then if you ever need to reset an object back to its original settings, you can do that too. So where it says transform, I can click on those three dots right here to the right of transform, and I just click reset. Boom. And now our cube is back to its original position, which is 0, 0, 0 for the position, the rotation, and the scale is a scale of 1. So this is the basic settings of the cube. All right, let's look at the other shapes. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add some more 3D objects. We've got a sphere. So the sphere is awesome. It's exactly what you'd expect. It's a sphere, right? Same tools, work the same way. Scale tool is kind of fun with the sphere. So if you don't want it to be a perfect sphere, maybe you want to make it oddly shaped, like egg-shaped or something like that. You could do that, right? Other objects. We've got the capsule. So a capsule is basically like a pill shape. If you've ever taken medicine, this is very much similar to the type of pills you may have had to swallow, right? So it's similar to a cylinder, except it has the curved top and bottom. So let's go look at the cylinder. This is the cylinder. Notice, like I said, it is very similar to the capsule. The biggest difference is the cylinder has a flat top and bottom, whereas the capsule has the curved top and bottom, right? So these are the basic 3D shapes that we have in Unity. There are also, of course, you would have noticed there were others in here, but some of these are a little advanced. I don't really use a lot of these. Plane is decent. I don't love it. Plane is used a lot of times by programmers to make the grounds, to make the floor, and that's fine. The only reason I'm not a big fan of plane is because technically it's not a 3D object. And what I mean by that is it might look like the ground and it might work good with these 3D objects, but if you go under it, it disappears. It's only viewable from one side. So it's not technically a 3D object because it has no depth. It only has the two directions. In this case, it's X and Z. So it only has the X direction and the Z direction. It has no Y, has no thickness. But you can use it for a floor. A lot of people do. There's also a quad, which is pretty similar, but I don't really use that either. A quad is like a plane, but instead of the X and Z direction, it is the X and Y direction that it has. But if you look at it from the back, there's nothing. So people sometimes use quads to do like 2D images in a 3D world. So maybe there's like a poster hanging on the wall. You might use a quad for that. All right, so these are the basic 3D objects. And then, like I said, there are some others which are more advanced, which we may or may not get to. We'll see how this goes. So now that we know how this works, we're going to use these 3D objects. Now that you know how to change their position and their rotation and their scale, we're going to use some of these, not all of them. We're going to use some of these, and I want you to create your own 3D object using multiple shapes, okay? Using multiple shapes, we're going to create a 3D object. Let me show you how this is going to work. First, I'm going to go ahead and delete all these objects. If you weren't aware, you can select multiple things in the hierarchy window at once. So what I just did is I clicked on the first one, I held down Shift, clicked on the last one, and that selected all of them. I could also do it one at a time by holding Control and clicking on each individual one, but that takes a while. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. So I want you guys to use these basic 3D shapes and build something. Get creative with it, but build something. So how's this going to work? Let me show you. So first I need to create the base object. So the base object is going to be the main body of the shape, right? So if you're building like a car, the base would be the main part of the car, not the wheels, not the doors, not the mirrors, right? If you're building something else, just think of what is the main piece of that object. So I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to build a tree. So for me, the main piece of the tree would be the tree trunk, which I'm going to make as a cylinder. So here's the cylinder for my tree trunk. Sound good? Looks good. All right. So now for the top of my tree, I want there to be a big bushy part. Let's use a sphere. Now, once again, this is what I'm doing. You do not have to copy me. In fact, I would love it if you were more creative and did your own thing. I've had students make some pretty cool stuff with this project, for this assignment. So I've got my sphere. I'm going to change the scale to make it look more like bushy leaves. So something like that. Let me check it from different angles. That's decent. Let me raise it up a little bit here. There we go. So this is the beginning of my tree. To keep this video short, I'm just going to stop it here. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But here I have the beginning of what looks like it could become a 3D object of a tree. Right now, in the hierarchy, the cylinder and the sphere are different objects. So it's not acting like one object yet. It still is two separate objects. If I use the move tool and I move the trunk, the leaves don't come with it. I'm going to undo that. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know it, edit, undo. If you ever make a mistake in your program, edit, undo. All right, so I've got something that looks like a tree, but it's not acting like a tree yet. It's still acting like two separate objects. So how do I make this act like a tree? Basically, I need to connect these two objects. So this is what we call a parent-child relationship. I said a few minutes ago that I wanted the tree trunk to be the base of my tree, to be the main part of my tree. So the tree trunk will be the parent. So I'm just going to go ahead and get the cylinder, and I'm going to rename it. I just clicked on it twice to change the name here. So I'm going to rename the trunk as tree. So that is the main object that I'm calling tree. Now I need the bushes, the leaves, to be attached to the trunk. Here's how I do that. Watch carefully. I'm going to click and hold where it says sphere, which is my leaves. I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to drop it into the tree. Did you guys see that? I dropped it into the tree. Now, in my scene view, it doesn't look like anything changed, but in my hierarchy, I do immediately notice a change because the sphere is now indented. It is now not just under the tree, but it's indented under the tree. And the word tree now has a little triangle next to it, which I can click on to close or open the stuff that's inside of it. So essentially, the sphere is now part of the tree. We call this a parent-child relationship. The tree is the parent, the sphere is the child. So what does this mean? This means that now when I select my tree, both objects are selected because they're both part of the tree. And if I move the tree, they both move together. And if I use any of these other tools, like the scale, they're going to scale together. If I rotate, they will rotate together. And they're doing that because all the adjustments I'm making now, I'm doing to the parent object, the tree. I'm going to undo that so it's standing back up. And let's change the size back to the way it was too. Okay. So I have a parent-child relationship, which is the tree. And then the sphere is the leaves on my tree. I could rename that too if I wanted to, just to help me keep track of what's what. So yeah, there I go. Now, can I still move the leaves? Absolutely. So if I decide that maybe the scale's not good and I want to adjust just the leaves, I could totally do that and it's fine, right? Because it's still its own thing. It's just attached to the parent. So now it's a little bit bushier than it was before. Looks pretty good. Okay. So that was simple enough. I had two objects. I dragged and dropped one inside of the other, and now I have a parent-child relationship. That's not the only way to do a parent-child relationship, though. You can also create an object as a child. So if I right-click on the word tree here, which is my base object, if I right-click on that object, the parent object, and I create an object here, so I'm going to create a tree branch for my tree. So I'm going to create another cylinder. Because I right-clicked on it, it automatically indented it as a child of the tree. And I'm just going to call this one branch. Oops, I spelled branch wrong. There we go. All right. So let's go ahead and start editing this tree branch. So I'm going to move it out. I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to change its scale a lot because I want it to be tiny compared to the tree trunk. Let's check it from some different angles. Looks pretty good. You know what this is starting to look like? This is starting to look like that character in the Kirby games. If you've ever played the Kirby games, there is a tree character that looks kind of like this where the branch is his nose and he has a couple eyeballs. Yeah. So now the branch, since it is still a part of the tree object, it is a child. Now if I do anything to the tree, all of the pieces are going to be involved, right? They're all part of it together. Which is great. Okay, so this is a great place to stop. I'm just going to undo those moves and rotates I just did. So this is a great place to stop for today's lesson. So here's what I need you guys to do. I need you to build your own object using these simple 3D shapes and using a parent-child relationship. That's the important part here. So using your shapes, figure out what part is going to be the base of your object, the parent of your object, and then add the other parts to it so that if I do anything to the main part, the rest of them will come with it, right? If I change its scale, its rotation, or its position, the whole thing should move together as one object. Feel free to get as creative with this as you want to. In the next video, we're going to make some edits to it. We're going to change its appearance, and then pretty soon we're going to turn it into a prefab. I don't know if that'll be the next video or one later, but we'll be doing that soon. So if you learned something new today, click that like button. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe, and I will see you guys for the next video, and we will edit our object some more then. All right, have a great rest of your day.